Welcome to The Catch Up with Claire. I'm your host, Claire Hoon, and every week we hand the mic to women who are showing up, speaking out, and figuring it out in real time. Because when women start talking, no topic is off limits. Careers, identity shifts, friendships, family dynamics, breakups, big dreams, bigger feelings, and yes, motherhood too. Think of it like calling your best friend on the landline in 1999. Lighthearted, unfiltered, and somehow deeper than you expected. Whether you're raising your kids, raising standards, or raising hell, this space is for you. So settle in. It's time to catch up. Welcome to The Catch Up with Claire. I'm your host, Claire Hoon. This is the second episode of our maternal mental health awareness series for the month of May. And this guest is so special to me. I am so grateful for the conversation we had, for her agreeing to come on, and for the information shared. Paige Bellenbaum is a leading voice in perinatal mental health and a respected expert in the field across state, federal, local agencies. Her work has informed how perinatal mood and anxiety disorders are treated within birthing people today. I had the absolute gift, honestly, of meeting Paige when I was 4 weeks postpartum and attended her new mom support group. I didn't know it at the time, but that support group really ended up saving my life. It was at the Motherhood Center here in New York City. I've talked about it before, but in attending her new mom support group, I received a diagnosis from my OBGYN of postpartum depression and was able to very quickly be connected with the care that they provide. We talk about in this episode, that first meeting, about her invitation for me to come back and about the care I received. But more importantly, we talk about what brought Paige to this work and her own lived experience with postpartum depression that has informed the last 2 decades of her career, how she started with a very micro level, treating patients and clients in a very one-on-one basis in a group setting, to where she is today and trying to effectuate macro level change, working with state agencies, working with federal agencies, working in the nonprofit community, working across corporations, working across universities and educational settings so that PMADs are taught in curriculum. And of course, we both talk about our own motherhood journeys being in very different phases. As most conversations with Paige does, this felt like a hug. She is so supportive and caring in how she shows up for new moms and how she shows up for new parents and how she shows up for her community. And that comes across in the conversation we had. If you are currently struggling or know someone who are struggling with postpartum depression, please take care in listening to this episode. We both talk about our experiences with postpartum depression. Please also know that it gets better. There will be resources in the show notes that you can reach out to. Please reach out for support. If you take anything from this conversation, it is that help is effective and things get better with the right support. With that, please enjoy this conversation with Paige Bellenbaum. Paige, welcome to the Catch Up with Claire.
Claire, it is such an honor to be here with you today.
Oh my gosh, I feel giddy about this conversation, which is already making me feel a little bit of tears in my eyes because we've just spent a few minutes chatting and because of how I know you. Paige, I am so excited to talk to you today because of how we met almost 8 years ago now and how I'm speaking to you in this capacity as a guest on the podcast, as the expert that you are around perinatal health and the conversation we're going to have today. I want to start by sharing how we met. I so vividly remember almost 8 years ago, it was July of 2018. I had a 4-week-old baby boy and was very, very deer in the headlight. I didn't know yet that I was experiencing postpartum depression, but I was doing as any new mom does, scrolling my phone on a Facebook mom group, and I saw someone say, advertising a new mom support group, and it didn't feel heavy. It felt like, hey, if you're a new mom and want to meet other people, come join us. And so thinking really nothing of it other than I don't know any other new moms. I don't have anyone in the city who has a baby. Let me join. And so I joined the group. I signed up for the group. The morning of the group, I had not left the apartment by myself with the baby. I hadn't gone anywhere by myself with the baby. And I don't know if it started at 10. I was waiting for my Uber at like 9:45, knowing it was going to take 30 minutes to get there. I stumble in, I think at like 10:30. And by the time I like had figured out getting the car seat into the Uber, getting to the 10th floor, it was at the Motherhood Center, checking in. I was in tears saying, I'm so sorry. I'm so late. I know there's only a few minutes left. And you came out, you're like, come on in. Everybody's welcome. I'm like, I had my baby because I didn't know what to do with him. And they're like, babies are welcome. And I can't tell you how much that felt like a giant hug. Being in this deer in the headlights, I had no idea what I was really looking for other than I just needed to be in a room with other people. And it was this sort of like drinking from the fire hose moment. And you were so welcoming. All of the other women in the room, with some were breastfeeding, some were with their bottles, just felt so safe and held and relaxed. And I was there, I made it like with 10 minutes left. And he said, don't worry, we're here every week. Make it whenever you want to come back. And I came back, and here we are 8 years, almost 8 years later.
Claire, as you're telling this story, I'm getting tears and the hairs on my arms are standing up. And, you know, for people who do this work and have the honor and privilege to work with pregnant and postpartum women and birthing people, this is why we do it. To be able to be in the presence of women and birthing people that are looking for community, that are looking to feel seen, heard, taken seriously, who are looking to feel not judged, but accepted, right? In all of our parts, in the way that we're showing up, whether it's messy or not, to just be embraced figuratively and brought into safety. And this is really what I feel like is such a foundational component of what the work is all about. So you have no idea what it means to me to hear that you were able to have that experience and that you were able to feel those feelings. So I can't thank you enough for giving me that gift today, which I will carry with me for a very long time.
I don't know what it was back then, but like as I reflect on it, and as I have reflected on it a little bit of like the universe bringing me to what like I needed, and also very life-saving care, because it truly is just, I'm a new mom. Here's an advertisement for a new mom group that was around 4 weeks postpartum. I then had my 6-week checkup with my OB, where I got a perfect score on the Edinburgh scale, being 26 or 27 out of 26. And it was the very end of my appointment. My doctor was like, because I presented very well, it was all internal, where I was in my head and struggling. They're like, do you cry? And I'm like, all the time. Do you laugh? There's nothing funny about this. Like, but again, presented very well. And she was looking at at scoring it, said, are you sure you're okay? And I was like, I'm okay. And she's like, I think we need to talk about this. And she wrote me a prescription for an antidepressant and said, I'd recommend you getting a therapist. And I was like, but what? Like, what are we talking about here? It didn't really click to me what she was saying. And in this, I had come back for a second and third time to this new mom group. And it was on the third session, I remember, we were in a little bit of a larger room, and I was really struggling, not having a community and not knowing any other moms. And you said to me, I'm really glad you're back here. And if you think you might need a little bit of extra support, we offer that. There's more things if you want to talk to someone. And I would have never proactively done that. But I was like, and you gave me a pamphlet and said, you can call anytime. And I did. I was like, well, maybe I should just see. And it should have been clicking, but it just wasn't clicking. I made the appointment. I did an intake, and it was that point they recommended a day program at the Motherhood Center. And I was like, that sounds really intense. That's not what I need. I'm not very, like, I'm just a new mom who doesn't know what I'm doing. I need to just have basic therapy. And so we're supportive, said, sure, no problem. And I was going away for 2.5, 3 weeks. I was taking the baby to where I grew up in St. Louis to meet my grandparents, to be away in Florida, and then ending with a bachelorette party that I was the maid of honor in. In Las Vegas, no, no, of course. And in my head, this made complete sense. I had made a commitment. I was going to be with my girlfriends. Motherhood was not going to get in the way of anything I was doing. And so I left that appointment of, don't need this larger treatment. That's not for me. I'm fine. I'll come back after my travels and after motherhood is not stopping me from slowing down. And I came back and we all know how the story ends. It didn't end well. I was very, very unwell, got progressively worse, ended up spending 5 weeks in the day program, which was completely life-saving and life-changing. But I didn't know so much. I didn't know so much about postpartum depression, about PMADs, all of these terms that I was learning about matrescence. And as I was learning it while getting the treatment, it made so much sense. It made so much sense to me that, of course, this is a huge transformation. Of course, it's, going from adolescence into becoming a young child, young adult. Same thing with motherhood. How come we don't know about this? How come the education ends with puberty? How come we aren't given this language? And how come I felt so unprepared? So in one regard, I felt so, and feel so grateful for the support and help and treatment that I received. And once I got out of it, I mean, it took 10 months. I was so pissed off. I was so mad and angry that I felt like, where is the health education? Where is the psychoeducation? Where is all this? And why aren't we talking about it? And I'm rambling for a while now, but because of everything I've been through the last 8 years, starting with what just felt like a moment that was meant to be in that initial meeting with you, has brought me to where I am now. Because as we were talking before this, it has really laid the foundation of my mental health, being able to be in that program, be so supported, given the tools, as we talked about, the both and two words that I've used all the time, but didn't understand the weight of the meaning, and has led me to be able to live this life that I have now as a mother of 3 children, doing really, really well. So a very long opening of saying, thank you so much for your role in this. And today I really want to talk about Paige and about you coming into this work and your experience with motherhood and where you've been in the last 8 years, because I know it is all over the place and really moving these conversations forward. But I just really couldn't do that without the most heartfelt thank you first.
I'm just taking it in. I'm taking it in and I'm holding it and I'm just noticing like the fact that I'm radiating with your narrative and your story and your journey. And so I just want to say again, thank you so much for giving me this gift of letting me know what it was like for you, where you are now, and what kind of an impact that has had on your life as a person, as a human, as a mother, as a wife, as a professional, as somebody who is out there making a difference in a way that we so desperately need. So, Claire, thank you for giving me that. One of the things that I want to start with responding to before I go ahead and talk a little bit about my own journey and kind of what brought me to where I am, I just want to say, I think something you're highlighting here is so incredibly important, right? You entered motherhood without any awareness of what might happen to you psychologically or emotionally. And I think this is still an area that we're missing that we really need to continue to emphasize is I look at providing information about what might occur during pregnancy and the postpartum as it pertains to a woman or birthing person's mental health. That awareness is prevention. Because if you had known on the front end, right, that 1 in 5 new and expecting mothers and birthing people experience perinatal depression or anxiety or OCD or PTSD or bipolar disorder or psychosis, right? If you knew how common it was to experience one of these conditions, and if you had been told, this is what you want to keep an eye out for, right? These are what risk factors look like. And also informed your partner, other people close to you. Listen, if you notice or observe Claire experiencing any of these different types of symptoms, there's a chance that she might be struggling. Oh, and by the way, Not only is it common for new and expecting mothers to struggle with their emotional wellness in the perinatal period, but it's also 100% treatable. And the sooner we get ahead of it and the sooner we're able to address it, the sooner we can get a new mother or an expecting mother back to her baseline so she can continue on focusing on the things that she enjoys in this amazing transformation. So I just want to thank you for raising that because I think it's so important and we still have a long way to go to get there. And it would have had an impact on your personal journey. So there's a lot of parallels in our stories. Mine goes way, way back, almost 20 years ago. But in a similar vein, even as a licensed clinical social worker who was trained to be able to recognize mental illness in other people, I had absolutely no idea what was happening to me during pregnancy or after I gave birth to my first child. Nobody told me, oh, did you know that if you have a history of depression or anxiety, you're at a greater risk of developing those symptoms during pregnancy or postpartum? Oh, did you know that if you're calling the OBGYN 4 times a day because you are ruminating with fear of something going on with the baby or fear that something is off, that might be an indication of anxiety, right? Oh, this must just be part of the package, right? And so fast forward to after I have my son, and I was probably about 3 months in. On top of the enormous anxiety I was feeling, I was hit by this overwhelming wave of depression, and it was debilitating. I was really having a hard time caring for my baby. I didn't feel connected to my son. I felt like I'd made a huge mistake. I wanted to buy a one-way ticket and fly off to a foreign country and never come back because I thought that my husband and my son would be better off as a unit without me. Those symptoms escalated and increased, and I became, really I started to really question whether or not I even wanted to be here. And so I struggled silently for over 6 months. I didn't really tell anyone how bad it was. I was afraid. I didn't want to be judged. I too thought, oh, there must be normal aspects of this. But for me, it really culminated one day when I was taking my son for a walk and pushing him in the stroller. And there was this bus that was coming down the street. And I just remember it so vividly. It was gray outside. I just felt kind of nothing. I felt like I was just walking in a cloud. And I looked at this bus coming by. And in that moment, I was kind of like, well, what if I just happened to jump in front of that bus, right? Like maybe all of this would be over. And as the bus passed, I caught a reflection of my face in the windows as it went by. And I remember looking at myself thinking, who is that person? I don't know her. I have no connection to her. And in that moment, that's when it really opened for me. I need help. And back then, there was literally nothing going on in the maternal mental health space except for one clinic. And I made an appointment for myself. I got up there, and the minute I walked into the room, they were like, you have severe postpartum depression. And so, like you, I got treatment. And like you, once I got better, and you said it a little bit more professionally than I usually do. So I'm going to get a little crass here, but I got pissed. And I was so angry that the more women I spoke to that said, me too, I feel that way now. I felt like that after I had a baby. I didn't tell anyone. I'm still struggling. I was like, what is going on? How is it that so many people are struggling in this transition that we all think is supposed to be blissful and beautiful and amazing, the best thing that ever happened to us, and we're supposed to love every minute of it, and we're supposed to know exactly what we're doing, and we're supposed to feel so in love with our baby and even closer to our partner, and we're supposed to be this amazing family unit, where I was just kind of like, I didn't have any of that. And if all of these people are having a similar experience to me, what is going on? So my background was in public policy and advocacy work. And so I started researching what other states and cities were doing about perinatal mental health treatment, education, anything for that matter. At the time, there was very, very little to research. But I started writing legislation. I was like, if we were to introduce something in New York State that really aimed to improve outcomes for pregnant and postpartum women struggling with perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, what might that look like? And there was a nominal amount of conversation around screening. And so I put together model legislation on requiring screening of all new and expecting mothers. And I took it to a state legislator that I'd worked with for several years. And I just was like, look, this happened to me. It happens to so many people. We're not doing anything about it. And she was like, sign me up. Let's do it. So fast forward, that bill was signed into law in 2014. And then shortly after, I joined forces with the co-founder, still there, and CEO of the Motherhood Center, Dr. Catherine Berndorf. And she had approached me and said, I'm thinking about opening this program. It's a partial hospital program. There's very few of them in the country. It's a higher level of care. And like, she had me sold at hello. And so we worked together from about 2015 until 2017 to open the doors. Still going strong today, offers support groups, outpatient therapy, and medication management. And as you so articulately described, Claire, this higher level of care called the day program, which is really intended, I want to say, if I'm being honest, for any new and expecting mother who's struggling at all. And in particular, new and expecting mothers that are really having a hard time caring for themselves, caring for their baby, and creating and fostering a sense of wraparound care and treatment so that perinatal people can feel well faster. So having had the honor and opportunity to work there for almost a decade, I more recently, and kind of in my last year or so at the Motherhood Center, was following this trajectory that I seem to have followed my entire professional career, which jumps from micro to macro, right? I mean by micro work, it's direct practice work. It's working directly with patients and clients that are experiencing some type of hardship. And in my line of work, a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. But I always find myself, when I'm working within the context of individuals and families, I find myself getting really angry with systems and structures and policies that keep people down, right? That have a macro level impact that we're not implementing. And I get so angry at that. So then I find myself inching back into the macro level work. And so that's really where I've landed and what I've been working on most recently. I still see patients. I still run groups, but I've really been focused on working with local, state, and federal governments to improve and invest in wide-scale initiatives that can have a greater impact on improving outcomes for perinatal people experiencing psychiatric illness. So I've been able to work with New York City agencies like the Administration for Children's Services, the Department of Health and Mental Health, the New York State Office of Mental Health. I've served and continue to serve on maternal mortality and morbidity review committees, which are responsible for investigating the tragedies of loss of life of mothers and birthing people. And as you may well know, mental illness and substance use disorder are the leading cause of maternal death in this country. So being a part of reviewing those tragedies and coming up with recommendations and policies to improve outcome. And Claire, I'll leave it here. Another thing that I've just been so honored and excited to do is develop and currently teach the first ever perinatal mental health course in a school of social work in the country. So I get to be, I guess this is more of kind of a mid-layer, but I get to be with new budding social workers that are being exposed to this work, that as a result want to go out into the field and work with clients and patients that are struggling, as both you and I did several years ago.
Paige, you have just given us so much. Thank you for all that. And part of me always feels I'm sorry that we've had to go through really hard times to come to the meaningful work that we feel pulled to, but also what a gift to be able to turn something so hard into giving back to the larger whole. Even on a micro level, like I can raise my hand so high that the experience you went through almost 20 years ago has transformed my life because of what you invested in the Motherhood Center, the work that you did on the very micro level to now at a systems level and the macro. Similar to you, I never ended up practicing, but we moved to New York because I went to St. John's and have my master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. I always thought private practice would be the route for me. I had graduated in May, got pregnant in October. We were planning to move at the end of our lease the following summer, which was when I was going to get licensed in whatever state we did. But I went through a 2.5 year master's degree program and never once did the term PMAD, postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, postpartum period come up. And so it didn't even occur to be in my sort of echelon of awareness. And so I emphasize that point because this course that you're now teaching to students who are going into the field, that, you hear about all of the different disorders in the DSM, but you don't hear about and you aren't taught about postpartum. And it is such, as you said, 1 in 5 birthing people will experience that. It's such a need. I want to back it up and sort of we'll start at the micro and then we'll move forward into the macro and the work you're doing today. Talk to me about the Motherhood Center and back in 2015 with Dr. Berndorf approaching you. Because of what I shared for this call, I'm looking to start my own brick and mortar place. I want it to be a community place and a place where women gather. It sounds so dreamy and it sounds like a place I want to be, and I know that women will want to be. And we live in New York City and nothing is fast and nothing is easy. And there's a lot of a lot figuring these things out. How did the two of you, take what you knew was so needed and so many women would benefit from and bring this from sort of idea to conception and a decade later, all the incredible work in women's lives that you've impacted? Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
First and foremost, and I talk to a lot of folks across the country that are just like us, right? This happened to me. I want to do something about it. What can I do? How can I get started? And I think what's so important, Claire, is, and this is true, I think, for a lot of individuals that enter the social service workforce, the psychiatric workforce, the mental health workforce, is I feel like having lived experience is a superpower. Fundamentally and truthfully believe that. It is such a motivating factor. It comes from a visceral place on the inside, right? Of wanting to protect and help other pregnant and postpartum people not have to go through the same things that we went through. And I have seen the most successful efforts, the most life-changing efforts come from that burning desire to invite better. So, I think that's such a fundamental ingredient to success. Dr. Berndorf, she's a leading psychiatrist in the field, incredibly well-respected, recognized across the world. She really brought her expertise and her commitment to this space, along with another co-founder at the time, to really conceptualize the creation of the Motherhood Center. I came in about a year after they had been thinking about what this might look like. I think in that collection of the three of us, having that lived experience that was so vocal and passionate, I think was a really driving force around creating the center and also launching it for success. As with any endeavor through the lens of business, there are obstacles and challenges, right? When you start a business, you make a lot of assumptions. And it's when you're actually in the business that you realize, oh, interesting. I kind of thought it was going to go this way, and that's not really the way. And so let's try it another way. And I think one of the things that was so important to the beginning and the continued growth of the Motherhood Center is that in the beginning, there was very much this philosophy and openness of let's throw things at the wall and see what sticks, right? Let's try this. If it doesn't work, then we'll say that didn't work. Let's try something else. And I think that flexibility and openness to be willing to try, to be willing to make mistakes, to be willing to celebrate and scale accomplishments is so necessary also in the successful development of an organization. And so, we started with a staff of 4. We were sweeping, we were cleaning bathrooms, we were running clinical groups in the day program. We were seeing patients. And then over time, it just started to grow and grow because it was so effective and became and continues to be a landmark organization when it comes to treating and supporting perinatal people. And so, what a gift and an honor to have been a part of that. I'm honored to still actually continue on as an education and government relations consultant for the organization and also see some patients. And so, yeah, just an amazing opportunity. And, I guess I would say as you're thinking about building out a space for this particular population and kind of thinking about what does it look like? What could it be? I always say start small. There's no reason to hit the ground running in an enormous way. It's okay to start very small, to troubleshoot, to try things on, to figure out what works and what doesn't, and to grow over time. So even if it was just a matter of having a space where you're running support groups or you're having education, whatever it looks like, it's okay to start small and build momentum. And the other thing I'll say that I also, will advise people on that are trying to start anything in this space is I think a lot of times because we recognize the undeniable need of having community and support in this very vulnerable time, that we can't just assume that if we build it, they will come. And so I think a really big part of building a successful foundation for a business of any kind is getting ahead of it and letting people know that you're coming.
Mhm.
Being able to kind of get out there, start your marketing, start your education, start your outreach to start to build that buzz. So, but by the time you are ready to say, my doors are open, I'm ready for you, that people know you're coming. Because I think a lot of times we, again, and guilty is charged, right? We need this level of care. We need this service. So once we open our doors, there's going to be a line around the block. And with the Motherhood Center in particular, and the day program, I've been doing a lot of work right now through the lens of education of providers in particular, is that when we're looking at PMADs, it's not a one size fits all approach, right? There are different components of care and a continuum of care based on symptom acuity. So for mild symptoms, maybe a support group will work well. For moderate symptoms, maybe seeing a therapist and or being on medication. But as you experienced, for people that are struggling a little bit more, an IOP or a PHP might be the right level of care. So there's also not enough education out there for providers to know, oh, wow, I have a patient I'm working with right now who's really struggling, and I know about this level of care over here. I'm going to make that referral.
It's all so accurate, like so helpful to hear. But I think also going back to what you said a few minutes ago of if we could just start with prevention early in pregnancy. We go to prenatal appointments at least once a month. We are constantly checked in on while we're pregnant, but we don't even hear about these things until afterwards. And sometimes you're so far into it that it does require this higher level of care. But I think about myself and sort of, if I knew I had this, I'm going to call it a soft landing of the motherhood post birth. If I want it, it's there. I want a support group, it's there. If I need the extra support of a day program, it's there. If I need a therapist, they're going to be there for me. And I think about the services that were that were included in all of that. What struck me really about the Motherhood Center was it never felt clinical. And yet it was the highest level of care, arguably, you could receive outside of a hospital setting. But it was so serene. It was so soothing. And I think, just thinking about sort of even I'll call it curriculum, but that's probably the wrong terminology. But, the art room, having painting, having, music time with baby, having a nursery that you could choose to keep your baby on your lap and on your body all day, or you could drop them off and know that they were just in the next room if you needed them. Having the different service providers that are needed to care for a new baby. I work with Ayla, and she's been my lactation consultant for the last year, and just incredible support around breastfeeding and feeding your baby, the sleep support, and how to make sure that the mom in birthing prison is getting enough sleep and that the baby is sleeping, and what is realistic expectations of newborn sleep and how to come up with a schedule. So all of these services provided, it's like we ask for a manual at the hospital and it's provided. And I wonder what it could be like in the future if we knew about this. Here's where to go. Here's where to get the support you needed. And it wasn't a place for needing, and not a place to go based out of need, but based out of this is where you go to learn how to be a new mom. And whatever comes up is supported that way. As you were talking, I was just thinking about all of this of like, how do we get the women who need it when they need it?
I'm so glad you're asking this question, Claire. And since I moved on from my original role at the Motherhood Center, one of the things I become very interested in is the extent in which we create pathways for others, for like-minded programs, right? And so I joined with a couple of my colleagues in the higher level of care space, and we decided we wanted to better understand what's going on in the context of perinatal intensive outpatient programs and partial hospital programs like the day program. And so we were able to raise some funding in the summer of last year to really start on the first body of research of these existing programs and what are the components of these programs and what does a typical day in the life of an IOP or a PHP look like? Now, you might be surprised to hear this, but we have well over 40 IOPs and PHPs in the country right now. And literally just in the last month, we learned of 4 new ones opening up. So we recognize that this is a movement that is starting to take off, but having spoken with and conducted a survey with over 70% of all existing programs, one of the things that these programs struggle with more than anything is filling up the seats that they have because providers in the community don't know and don't understand what it is that they're doing. So what we're really trying to do is create some very concrete components of universal care in the IOP PHP community and ultimately use this information to have a macro impact, right? I don't think policymakers or health insurance companies, for that matter, have a very solid understanding of the efficacy of this level of care for all the reasons that you just stated. You're getting everything in one place, right? And as opposed to, and this is outpatient treatment is phenomenal, but if you're dealing with somebody who really needs all of those components and they're only in outpatient therapy, then it's going to be months, if not years, before they start feeling any kind of improvement in the acuity of their symptoms. When we have programs like this, we know people feel much better, much faster. And so what is it going to take for us to be able to make a substantiated claim that these programs work, that they save lives, that they keep families together, right? That they improve a whole host of outcomes, not only just for mother, but for the mother-infant dyad. And how do we start to have that conversation and bring this to a larger platform and a larger scale? So to your point, right, some of that work is happening and it hasn't been done before. So stay tuned. We're going to have a fact sheet coming out. We're going to be doing a webinar with the Maternal Mental Health Leadership Alliance. We have a big presentation at Postpartum Support International at their annual conference in June, where we will be sharing the findings of all the research that we've been conducting since then.
It occurs to me too. So I know the term PHP because of what I went through when I walked through the doors of the motherhood for the first time. I had never heard that before. I didn't know that. Can you tell us about what PHP and IOP stand for and what that higher level of care looks like, please?
Yeah. So I'll walk you kind of through the continuum. So if we're talking about outpatient treatment, right, that usually means that somebody's seeing a therapist once a week and or a psychiatrist, ultimately a reproductive psychiatrist, more frequently in the beginning, less so over time, but perhaps a couple times a month, maybe once a month over time, When we start to move into a higher level of care, the next step up is an intensive outpatient program or an IOP. Now, we have these programs all over the country in ways that target different demographics. So we have general IOPs and PHPs. We have IOPs and PHPs for substance use, for eating disorder. And so this really is kind of the most recent wave of having these specialized levels of care for the perinatal population. So in an IOP, you are most likely, more often than not, going in person, but also some programs are virtual or hybrid, and you're receiving wraparound care usually 2 to 3 times a week for about 3 hours a day. So this includes being a part of clinical groups, process groups, having a therapist, sometimes having access to a prescriber on site, but a lot of times having access to a partnership with a prescriber off site. So you're getting not a little bit, a lot of enhanced care beyond that of what you would receive in an outpatient setting. When we step up to a higher level of acuity, of symptom acuity, right? Symptoms are more severe, then we're looking at a partial hospital program or a PHP. And these programs typically run 5 days a week for 5 hours a day. And they are comprised of clinical groups, process groups, also comprised of different types of therapeutic interventions. So it could be art therapy, music therapy, dyadic therapy. Sometimes we see some of those also in IOPs. And there's always an on-site prescriber. So you're also meeting with a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse practitioner. So you're basically getting all of that under one roof. And so really the difference between an IOP and a PHP is PHPs offer more of that, right? But IOPs offer more than outpatient treatment. Now, both of these programs can be life-saving, and the intensity of intervention, which you clearly stated, many of these programs have on-site nurseries. Many of these programs have integrated different types of intervention, right? So whether it's art or it's drama or it's music, many of these programs offer components of support to fathers and non-birthing parents. Many of these programs also offer family support or couples support. A lot of these programs have an aftercare component. So once you graduate from your program, you still are staying connected to some of the people in your cohort and your community as you are moving through treatment. So what I'm really excited about with this study and this white paper that we're going to be publishing is we're going to be able to capture all of those components and say an overwhelming majority of IOPs and PHPs in this country are doing this. This is a best practice. So for those of you who are thinking about starting something similar, that you have a baseline, because I think so many of us in this space, we reinvent the wheel, right? We think we're starting something for the very first time. And how beautiful it would be if we had community, not only for new and expecting mothers, but community for providers who are doing this work, so that we can learn from each other's best practices and make sure that, for those of us who want to start something similar, even to what you're talking about, Claire, that we're doing it from a place of knowing what works, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
I'm curious, as you've been going about this, and I love what you said earlier about lived experience is a superpower, because I believe that with my whole being, 100%. It has informed the lived experience I had in the moment I found out I was pregnant up until, now, but everything I went through in that very, very intense first 18 months of motherhood. Um, has informed everything about my being now. And that is when you're talking to a lawmaker, like the senator who you worked with on the Motherhood Center, when you're talking with practitioners and trying to put in place a prevention model. I'm curious how that's received in various audiences. And, I heard you bring up lawmakers. I heard you bring up insurance carriers. I heard you bring up individuals. So when you're talking to an OBGYN who has 15 minutes at most and has to go through their standard protocol of care and have to bill so many patients, do you see a difference in sort of the MDs that are treating pregnant people, of who are more receptive? Has it been a change since you've been in this line of work of early on, it was very difficult to get their ear, and now they're sort of seeing, okay, we need to do more. So, before, I had my first Edinburgh almost 8 years ago. Then when I had it with my middle daughter, I was coming and I was ready for it. And I was like, I'm feeling really good. I'm proud of the score that I know I'm going to get on this. And then I have to tell you, I love my OBGYN. I switched after my first pregnancy because that a lot could have been prevented, I think, if she had been asking the right questions. But in my third pregnancy, 6-week visit, didn't give me the scale. And I asked for it. And I was like, are we going backwards? Is this part of the climate that we're in sort of politically now, and with the level of care and priorities and agendas shifting a little bit? Was it an oversight? I knew to ask for it and I was expecting it, and I actually still didn't even get it. I'm curious how you've seen it ebb and maybe flow in from a provider perspective in your time in the field.
Such a good question. And I'll say again, having been in this space for 2 decades now, which is, yeah, whoa, getting older there. But I will say we've made so much progress. When I think about the fact that nobody even knew what a screen was for postpartum depression, hardly. I mean, no providers were using a screen back then, no OBGYNs, no pediatricians. It just wasn't happening. And we fast forward to today, there has been an enormous amount of progress made in the field of prevention, psychoeducation, treatment, education, all of those things. Are we near to where we need to be? Abso-freaking-lutely not. And I think one of the really determining factors, a pivotal moment in history in the context of perinatal mental health, was when the CDC came out in the early 2020s with the maternal mortality rates and really proclaimed for the first time in history the correlation between psychiatric illness and maternal death. And I think that's when the conversation changed. And I think that's when policymakers of all levels of government, academic institutions, providers, that's when the focus started to grow and expand. It is true that it took something so painful to capture the attention of all of these various disciplines. And yet it really opened a portal of need and like the critical nature of doing more. So there has been continued progress in the space. When it first was introduced into both houses in the state legislature, it was introduced as requiring screening. It was vetoed by the governor at the time, who said it wasn't his job to tell the medical community how to do their job. So we had to reintroduce it as recommend, right? In my work in policy, this is one of the most critical and vital words: require versus recommend. And so I use that as an illustration because still in New York State today, we do not require that people screen for postpartum depression or any type of perinatal mood and anxiety disorder during pregnancy or postpartum. We have had an onslaught of groups like ACOG that really, oversees OBGYNs, that strongly recommends routine screening. And we have other entities like the American Pediatric Association that encourages routine screening. These are not required and mandated screens. And also, when you start to compare these different entities of what they're recommending, they're making different recommendations. So even as something as preliminary as screening is not required, psychoeducation is not required, creating accessible and affordable mental health care is not required. And we know that that is one of the biggest obstacles to treatment. Having culturally responsive care available is also a barrier, right? So there are still an enormous amount of barriers and obstacles to receiving care. And I think to your point, right, when you think about kind of the historical trajectory, and this might be very disclosing of my own political preferences, but we happen to be at a moment in time where it feels like a lot of the work that we had done is being undone. And I'll give an example. Last year, the FDA held a panel discussion with people who had very little to no experience working with pregnant and postpartum women and SSRIs, which are commonly prescribed to treat perinatal mental health conditions, except for one woman that was on that panel who was very well informed and really carried the voice of all of us who do this work and set the stage of misinformation about the safety and efficacy of taking antidepressants during pregnancy and postpartum. We have ample research to suggest the safety and efficacy. So to unravel the progress that has been made in creating more of an openness for pregnant and postpartum women to take care of themselves, to eliminate all of the awareness that has been raised around the adverse impacts of untreated illness on a gestating fetus and on an infant and a child as they develop throughout being a toddler into their, teenage years. We know the impacts of not treating these illnesses. In fact, it comes with a price tag of billions of dollars, 14.2 billion to be exact. So when we see things like this happening in history, right, it's heartbreaking, right? It makes your heart drop just when we were getting somewhere, right? And to have that completely set back. That said, I have nothing but hope because the people who are committed to this work through the lens of research, education, training, treatment, we persevere. More and more people that are committed to this field and recognize the relevance of being in this space continue to grow and expand, right? Like we're just going to keep getting better at this. And we're going to keep moving in the direction of lowering the rates of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders that pregnant and postpartum people experience. And we're going to continue to lower the rates of lives that are lost due to untreated illness. I have no question, even in the face of minor setbacks, look at you. You're a part of that solution. You have this podcast, right? You've done so much work in this space already. You're thinking about opening a space for pregnant and postpartum people to come together, have community and feel better, right? We're going to tackle this, right? I hope I see it in my lifetime, but we will tackle this.
And I'm so hopeful because of what you can't take away is the boots on the ground and the work that you're doing and continue to do and have been doing. As you said, early 2020s, having this portal from the findings that the CDC put out, it felt like a little bit of an accelerator. And I think throughout time and history, we can always say things, we go forward and we come back a little bit, we go forward, we come back. We're a little bit of the come down right now, but what cannot be erased is the history and the truth of the experience you had almost 20 years ago and the work you've been doing ever since. The experience I had 8 years ago and how that's informed how I've lived my life and how I've spoken to the pregnant people in my life and the people that I meet and the work that I want to do and embark on. And that isn't ever going to go anywhere. You can't take away the experiences that we've had. And why I'm so encouraged by the courses that you're beginning to teach, hearing about the work you're doing at an interagency level here in New York City with Department of Health, with ACS. I think the more conversation and keeping it in just sort of the general echelon and ethos of conversation right now, especially as we approach May, and this episode will come out May during Maternal Mental Health Awareness Month. I think that is so important. And I'm actually very curious to see, this year just feels a little bit different. I think we can acknowledge that. It's okay to acknowledge that women's initiatives feel harder to get attention. I think all the women are down here raising our hands like, we're still here. We still need to support. Listen to us. We're ready. And I think there's a macro pressure to maybe try that back a little bit, which is unfortunate, but that doesn't mean the need isn't there. That doesn't mean that we're going to stop talking about it, that we're stop going to take action, that we're going to stop having these conversations, that you're going to stop doing this research and coming up with the solutions because it's needed and it's wanted. And we're going to see it in our lifetime because we have to. And so I'm going to keep talking that and working that into existence because that's what we need. And that's what the women and the birthing people and the parents need.
Well said, Claire. I'm right there with you. And I'm so excited to be working alongside of you in this field, in this space, and for all of the other women and birthing people to come, those that have lived experience, those that don't, but recognize that there's such a critical need here. And as you were speaking, it just makes me think, the cat's out of the bag. We're not
Truly.
stuffing that thing back in, and it's just going to get bigger and bigger. So cheers to all of the positive impact to come.
Paige, I want to wrap us up in the same way that we sort of kicked this off and talk to me a little bit about what motherhood looks and feels like for you now, knowing, the hard start to it and how it's really informed, as you said, the last 2 decades of your life. Talk to me about where the motherhood side has in you.
Oh, if I get a little teary here, forgive me in advance, but don't, right? Because this is what motherhood is.
That's what we're here for.
My son started college in the fall of last year,
Wow.
and launching him was a both and pride, excitement, and heartbreak that my firstborn, one of the apples of my eyes, was launching and leaving. And I will never make peace with the absence that I feel. I'm working in his room right now. It lets me feel close to him. And also, we live in New York, so we also work out of our bedrooms, let's be real. And in a similar vein of the both and, my daughter is now about to launch. And, she's been working her butt off these past 4 years of high school. She's so driven. She's so self-motivated. She's so focused, and is really starting to feel her own self-worth through some of the schools that she's hearing from, which is such a delight. But what we were talking about in the very beginning was walking alongside the joy and the grief of motherhood. And so what I am walking alongside of right now is the pride I feel, the excitement for her to go out and be an amazing woman, which she already is, and the grief of this is my last child leaving home, and I'm going to be navigating a huge absence in my life, which is my 2 kids, which are my everything. I'm in between the joy and the grief. And I think one of the most important things that we can do in our motherhood journey, because as you know, with having an 8-year-old and children of different ages, right? We're constantly moving through the last stage of something, right? The last stage of pre-K, the last stage of kindergarten, the last stage of middle school, right? It's constantly moving through beginnings, middles, and ends with our children. And then new beginnings right after that. And so that's kind of the space I'm in right now. And I'll tell you what it's made me really do is like, I am savoring literally every second I have with my daughter right now, to the point where she's like, oh my God, would you just back off? I'm like, nope, sorry. Like, I just think she's the coolest thing. I think both my kids are super cool, and they're like kind of adults now. And I'm like, you're awesome. So what am I doing right now? I'm celebrating motherhood. I'm celebrating all of the hard parts. I'm celebrating the joys. I'm celebrating the things that maybe I could have done differently, but also the things that I feel great about that I did. And I'm really realizing that, like, once a mother, always a mother. It never stops. And I'm trying to figure out, like, what the heck am I going to do now that both my kids are gone? So if you have any good ideas, let me know.
I relate so much to what you're saying of their first is our last. And as I was sharing with you, I don't think I finished the full story, but I walked into the pediatrician office yesterday for our last baby's first 1-year visit, thinking, like, when I look at her, she compared to my other two, she's just a baby. She's so little. And I open the door and there's a newborn, and the two parents are trying to hold him and get his diaper on, and he's fussing. And like, I remember so vividly being 1 year ago with our newborn, and now she's 1. And last night I got emotional with my husband, saying for the past almost 8 years, I've had motherhood as this anchor in every single decision that I've made, and has informed everything I've done of, well, I'm in it with postpartum depression. And so I have to get through this. Like, I just have to focus and be present on the day to day. And then it was, well, we're going to have another baby. And so it's not the right time to make any changes. And then after our second, I was like, I was going for a promotion, but I was like, I don't know if it's the right time because I know what that's going to take energetically. And I know another baby. And now having honored that phase of life, I feel a little bit like I'm like walking outside naked. Like, what is it going to be like? What is going to fill this next chapter of the book? And motherhood's still going to be there. My kids aren't going anywhere. Your kids aren't going where, but there's going to have to be a new part of me that comes into being that I have to pour into and I have to figure out and I have to get to know. And it's a little bit scary. And I'm trying to anchor myself in the possibility and the excitement of it. But there's this unknowing that in very different phases of it, but I feel like I'm there with you in this figuring out what's coming next.
And I think that's the community that we have as mothers, right? Is no matter where we are in our motherhood journey, is that we're always closing a chapter and walking into a new one. And it's going to look different as our kids reach different ages. But at the end of the day, it is the ritual of going through that space of, and I always say this to new and expecting moms, just when you think you cracked the code on how to respond to your child, they go and do something completely different. And it's just this constant learning of how to show up in this new iteration of motherhood. And I think that's another chapter in the novel of what it is to be a mom that we don't talk enough about, is what that looks like. And getting back to our whole connecting point around walking with grief and joy simultaneously in the both and. And I think one thing that I can say is that having gone through several chapters at this point, I kind of say the same thing that I say to brand new moms that are when they say, does this get easier? And my response would be, it doesn't necessarily always get easier. It just gets different. And I think, yeah, I think that's a really important lesson. And you know, it's funny, as you were talking, I kept thinking about like all the times that, you know, when I had young children and people would say that really irritating thing to me of like, oh, enjoy every minute of this because it will pass so quickly. And how I would just be like, just stop. Like, don't even say that to me. Like, do you realize how hard this is in this moment? And so again, as I'm approaching this chapter of my kids launching, there's a part of me that recognizes that and can understand why people say that. But what I want to say to that person, as I'm saying to myself, is instead of looking back and missing and longing for all of those other chapters, what an exercise to be able to look at a new mom with a baby and celebrate the journey, right? I remember when I was there. I remember when I was 5 years later. Look at me now, right? Like, I did the best job I could as a mom. I was good enough. I really showed up. And I'm so grateful that I found it within myself to be that to my children. And so if we could, as mothers, start to embrace that self-gratitude from early on, just to think of how much more capable we would be of celebrating ourselves. And yeah, that's something that I've learned over the course of motherhood is there's not a lot of, if anyone out there that's going to come up to you on a regular basis and say, good job, Claire. You did a really great job while your kid was having a meltdown on the subway and everyone was staring at you and you kept your composure, right? The only person who can pat ourselves on the back is us. So learning how to exercise that muscle of, I handled that pretty well, right? I did the best I could. That's so important. It's so important.
Paige, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for following that lived experience you had and turning it into the work that you do. It has been life-saving for myself. It's been life-saving for so many women. And the work that you continue to do on the consultancy side, on spreading the word, on doing the research, on providing the tools to measure how we can make an impact and have no other people experience what we've been through, makes a difference. And in the same way that you said, we don't get the thank you and we don't get told we're doing a good job, I want you to hear it from someone who has been the direct beneficiary of the work that you've done. it matters so much. And truly, thank you.
Claire, thank you. Thank you for giving me the gift of being connected to your lived experience and the honor of being a part of how far you've come. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, to have this vital and important conversation. And thanks for having me. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
We'll stay in touch.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Catch Up with Claire. If you did, I would so appreciate if you subscribe, follow, rate, and comment wherever you're listening from. Share it with someone else you think might enjoy listening. This is how I can continue to have these conversations and bring these conversations to you. Until next time, be kind, be brave, and be safe out there.